I watched my son learn the shape of absence, the way the tide learns the shore. Every morning he woke in a town stitched with train whistles and long roads, and every night he lay down miles away from the little room where his child slept under a moon lamp. He was 36, competent and tired, a man who could carry steel beams and still feel defeated by the weight of a small good night left unanswered. The distance between them felt like a pane of glass that never fogged from breath. He told me he was fine, but I saw how guilt lived on the back of his shoulders like a backpack never set down. The child asked quiet questions at the sink, words thudding softly like pebbles in a pocket. Why are the stars different where he is? When is he coming home for real? I rinsed the cups and tried to give simple truths the shape of comfort. Some days the truth felt like a thin blanket in winter. I tucked the child in, smoothing the sheets as if smoothing could undo a highway. At night, after the dishes and the laundry and the shoes lined by the door, I sat with my tea and thought about how love travels. It does not need tickets. It does not even need perfect roads. It needs a rhythm and a reason. My son had both, yet the gap between having and holding a child had turned into a corridor of long days. He sent packages from his distant city. He signed them with little drawings. The boxes were warm for a moment, and then they were cardboard again. The child kept a crayon portrait of him on the dresser. Wide smile, square hands, a sky that always looked like noon. I would catch the child tracing the outline, not to change it, but to remember the way a face can be a lighthouse. Those were the evenings I felt the house breathe with two patterns, one close and one far. And I knew the closeness needed a bridge more human than tracking numbers and arrivals. I phoned my son and heard the weariness in the spaces between words. Work leaves a person quieter. Distance leaves them echoing. He mentioned a cold sandwich, a delay at the site, the way the city felt like a room with all the lights on and no place to sit. I listened and saw the small boy here at home, making a fort with blankets, leaving a gap that was obviously a door meant for a father. In that quiet, I understood that presence is a craft we must learn, like knitting or prayer. A craft made of repeated gestures, small loops that add up to warmth. I set my cup down and decided to show him a way to stitch. When I suggested it to him, his silence lingered, not heavy with refusal but trembling with hesitation. Read a bedtime story, I told him, not on paper, but on the glowing little screen that already knew too much of our days. He laughed gently, the kind of laugh a man uses to hide his doubt. Will it matter, he asked, if he's only looking at me through a rectangle? I reminded him that love has always traveled through vessels less perfect than we wish, letters that took weeks, songs hummed into the wind, prayers whispered into night skies. Why not a story carried by pixels and light? The first night, he chose a book from memory, a tale of a brave little bird who flew farther than anyone thought it could. The child held the phone awkwardly, propped against a pillow, and his father's voice slipped into the room like the return of an old scent. At first the words stumbled, broken by the small delays of the connection, but soon the rhythm found them. The boy's eyes grew softer, chasing the story's colors, and I sat outside the door, listening to the faint hum of distance, trying its best to vanish. But there were nights when the effort wavered. His hands ached from labor, his back pressed with fatigue, and the call felt heavier than the silence. The signal would crack, the sound would twist, and the boy's face would fall into that familiar question, why can't you just come home? Those were the nights when guilt washed over him like rain against glass, blurring everything. He feared the ritual might turn into a reminder of what he could not give. Still, the grandmother in me reminded him, consistency was its own gift. So he tried again the next evening, voice hoarse but steady, reading about giants and secret gardens, about forests where the trees remembered your name. Each word was a thread tying itself into the child's memory. I noticed the boy started waiting earlier by the bed, blanket ready, lamp dimmed, as though preparing the room for a sacred guest. And perhaps that is what those calls became, a small temple of togetherness, built not of walls, but of repetition and intent. One night, after the story, I heard the boy whisper, "Don't hang up yet." And so they stayed, not speaking, just breathing across the miles, the screen glowing faintly between them. That silence, I realized, was not empty, it was filled with the quiet relief of being known, even from far away. Weeks passed, and what began as a hesitant attempt grew into a ritual that carried its own gravity. The boy no longer asked if his father would call, he prepared for it. knowing that no matter how weary the man looked, his voice would still arrive. The stories began to weave themselves into the child's world. He spoke about them during the day, drawing dragons on scraps of paper, humming the songs of characters he had only met in those glowing minutes before sleep. His father, from miles away, became both author and anchor, a presence felt more deeply with every word spoken into the night. The father's own heart began to shift. Where once he felt swallowed by guilt, he now felt the strange weight of belonging in a new form. He realized that presence was not a single act, but a pattern, and each story was a thread adding to a fabric that distance could not tear. Even when his eyes burned with exhaustion, the moment he heard his child's voice, some inner light returned. He told me once that the stories weren't just for the boy, they were for him too. In telling them, he remembered he was still more than a worker in a distant city. He was a father, carrying love across wires and time zones, shaping a memory that would outlast absence. Yet there were evenings when the boy cried, wishing his father were there to kiss his forehead for real. Those nights carved deep marks in him, and I heard it in his voice, a trembling quiet that said he wished the world were different. But the call never stopped. He kept reading, because love is not the absence of longing, it is the decision to remain, even when longing persists. The boy began falling asleep with the phone still beside him, his small hand resting near the screen as though it was skin. The father would wait, speaking softer, until the breaths grew even and the child drifted into dreams. I imagined those dreams carried his father's voice like a gentle compass, guiding him through lands made of story and song. And so, love found a way to stretch across the miles. A father who once feared being a shadow became instead a light shining nightly, not diminished by distance but magnified by devotion. When the child grows older, he may forget the exact titles of the books, but he will remember the warmth in the telling. And his father, who once carried guilt like a heavy stone, will remember that he gave his child not absence, but presence shaped in story. Because love, when spoken aloud with care, does not fade, it echoes. If this story touched you, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.